everyone, and welcome to Dine with a Divine. I'm your host, Ashley, and as always, we'll be diving into the magical, the mystical, and everything in between. Today, we're going to be chit-chatting about fairies, and to date, one of the most random fairy stories I ever read. Today, we have an absolutely fantastic guest, Mattai, and Mattai is a witch, pagan, and cult survivor. He regularly speaks at pagan events in the UK and is a member of a Welsh language coven. His debut book is coming fall 2024 and is going to be published by Llewellyn. Moss, how are you doing today?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Excited to chat.
Good. I'm so happy that you're here. As I asked pretty much everybody, how did your journey into the spiritual and all this good mythology and all this stuff start with?
Because it's not the most traditional path, I don't think. Because as you said, having come out of sort of high control religion, I'm pretty much living the opposite life that I was raised in now. So I was raised I was born in Germany, moved to Wales when I was quite young, and went through the Welsh language schooling system. Mm-hmm. So I learned all of the amazing stories and the myths and legends of Wales in the Welsh language growing up. But that's all they were at that point. They were just stories. They were fun and entertaining, but there was no depth to them to me because I wasn't allowed to connect to them.
Yeah.
And then eventually I left that high controlling religious environment, and I found that there was a different way to approach that we could take value, spiritual value in those tales, that they could be something that holds you, that connects you to your land and your culture and your language. And those things that had already been there suddenly took on a new weight and value to me. So I was really lucky that I met my partner Brett a little while after leaving, and he introduced me to witchcraft. And we attended some local moots in which we met Mara Starling, who wrote Welsh Witchcraft. And through her work and eventually joining a coven with her, I was able to find that depth of connection in those tales and in the landscape I lived in. And it was just beautiful. It was really lovely because to me, the power of witchcraft and paganism and the path that I follow is that we can immerse ourselves in symbolism, that we can look at these tales not necessarily as true historic accounts or simply as stories, but as symbols that we can find that value in, which was mind-blowing to me coming from fundamentalism, where it was very, this is the way, this is the meaning, to be able to go to that and interpret it and find joy and then make stupid little videos about it. That's also half the fun. So it was a roundabout and long journey, but I'm very happy with where I ended up.
Good. Oh my gosh, I love that. So you grew up in this very high control environment, and you heard the stories, did you always feel when you were younger, I feel like there's more. Did you start to feel that like when you were young, or did it happen when you got older and probably started deciding like, this environment is a lot, like I need to get out of here?
To be honest, the stories growing up in a Welsh school environment, they were inescapable. So in drama classes, for example, we acted out the tale of Culhwch ac Olwen, one of the Mabinogion stories. And my auntie at the time lived in Bala, right on the shores of Llyn Tegid, where the story of Ceridwen happens. So, because the tales are quite rooted in the landscape locally. So they were always present, but that's all they were then. They were just stories, like any other story. I didn't realize you were allowed to find some deeper meaning and value in them. It was really strange. I already had my book of stories called the Bible, and that was the only one I was ever allowed to find any meaning in.
Yeah.
But the thing that I find so magical with them is that they were always there. So even though I didn't have that, they lodge themselves inside you. As soon as you hear them, there's that spark, there's that something about them that's so captivating that you can't get them out of your head. And the way I describe it is they were just there waiting for me, calling me home slowly, but waiting till I was ready to connect and to find that spiritual value in them.
Oh, I love that. I think it's so funny, like, because I liked mythology from a young age, and I would hear stories, and I always just thought they were like fun. And I was like, oh, this is so entertaining. And I grew up with I grew up with not in a super high control environment, but I did grow up in a
Mm.
Catholic environment, and like I heard stories, and that's why I was saying before, like in a different episode, but I was always attracted to the stories of the saints because their lives just seemed like real wild, and I was like, huh, these people are experiencing their spirituality in this really cool way and not this very boring, this is, you do this, you do that. You said it's like there's a rule and this is what it means, and shut up and don't ask a question about why it means that. It just
Yeah.
does. Yeah. But when you hear these other stories, and I try to relate it sometimes. I guess this is why people go into, and not only in Christianity, but other religious orders, like why you go to be a monk or something, because you want to experience that full spirituality in the way that maybe you want to experience it. I think that I hate to use the word alternative, but in other, out of the big boys, out of the big five big boys, let's say, like Judaism and all that stuff, I think outside of that, we have a little bit more room to do that, more freedom, not so much restriction. A lot of these things are old and ancient that sometimes we have more free agency to be like, maybe it actually means a little bit of this now, and maybe it means a little bit of that. Because unfortunately, a lot of our stories, and I don't know about Welsh mythology too much, but I know a lot of mythology ends up being oral now because we don't know exactly. But so, like, through thousands of years, it may have changed a little bit. Like, that's fine. Like, it adds a little flavor, a little spice,
Yeah.
you know?
I think that's one of the beautiful things about it, though, that it has that flexibility to change and that we can find the interpretation in it that fits our life at any moment. And that's what I find so amazing about these mythologies, is they originate in a time we can't really relate to, in a culture that is so far removed from us now, and yet we still find value in them. But it's where I struggle with sort of reconstructionism versus reinvention. I think it's so hard to reconstruct any kind of tradition exactly as it was because it doesn't fit our time. It doesn't fit the way we live life today. Whereas when we approach it as something to interpret and reinvent in the present moment and allow it to be that thing that is an oral tradition that can grow and change, then it becomes something that's relevant to us in the moment. And that's what I love about Welsh mythology, is it does that time and again. There's people today who reapproach those sources and write new stories based on the Mabinogi tales, for example, or retell those stories in a way that makes sense for us. And I think that's really empowering in a really profound way.
And you make such an awesome point about that reconstruction. Yeah, it's very, I find it to be weird. I don't care if I insult these types of people, but certain people, I don't care if I offend you. I find it weird to be like, let's go back to this creepy patriarchal weird system. Like, why? Number one, why? It was weird. Everybody was uncomfortable. Like, why are we doing this? But yet, like you said, like, just taking these things, like, how does it relate to me now, makes 10 times more sense. And most mythology stories, like what you find with Welsh mythology, and I find it with different mythologies too, is like, you can take those stories and be like, mythology is absolutely wild. Like, the shit that happens doesn't make sense. And it doesn't need to. Sometimes, like, people are born out of like a smokeless flame and a sperm of a wolf. I don't know how it happened, but it happened. And don't ask me questions about that part. Yeah. Like, it's fine. Like, there's knives in the wind. Like, there's all sorts of weird shit happening.
I love it.
But yeah, the fact that we can look at these ancient characters and be like, oh, I see what you can see the metaphor, and you can see this is what they went through. This was their journey to get to where they need. And I'm going through shit too. This is crazy. I can relate this story to who I am. I love that. And I think too, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but for somebody who is going through what you went through, it probably was a little bit of like an escape for you.
Oh, absolutely. And it's, again, what I love so much about the kind of witchcraft I practice is I can go to those folkloric sources and interpret it for myself and find that value. It's like you were saying just before, a lot of people might join very strict faiths because there's someone who tells you exactly how it is and how it should be, and there's rules to follow. And that might be what works for some people, and that's valid. But for me, I think spirituality is something you've got to discover and interpret for yourself, rather than having a priesthood to tell you what to do. You become almost the priest of your own spirituality. You're the one doing the interpreting and figuring it out. And it's hard work. And I get why that's not for everyone, because you really do need to sit down and figure out, what do I think and why do I think it? And there's no one telling you that's right, that's wrong. It's just, it becomes this personal thing, but it's so liberating and empowering as well, particularly when contrasted with sort of the upbringing I had, where it was so strict and this is right and this is wrong and there's no explanations and you can't be gay, that's wrong, which didn't work for me for obvious reasons. To come out of that and go, no, that doesn't make sense. And it doesn't work spiritually. And it doesn't have to either. The idea that there is not one true path, because that's another side effect of approaching it that way and going, okay, what am I interpreting in this? Is you have to accept your interpretation is yours, and you can't be dogmatic and say everyone must follow my tradition and my path. So it opens those doors wide open and goes, there are so many valid paths, whereas these sort of stricter traditions oftentimes go, we're the only valid way. Whereas in the paganism and witchcraft sphere, it's very much, this is a valid way, but there are so many others. And I find that to be such a beautiful thing as well.
Yes. It makes me so happy. Okay, so what inspired you to start writing your book that's coming out in the fall?
That is a really good question. It was sitting with my journey for a bit and realizing the thing that really blew my mind is how many people in this strange fringe world we inhabit have actually come from quite strict religious backgrounds, because it's not something that's really talked about in the open. There's a lot of shame around it, and there can be a fear of putting yourself out there that sometimes people might not respect you or invalidate where you are at spiritually because of where you've come from. I don't know, there's a whole load of reasons. Or it might just be that trauma you've experienced is too great for you to publicly speak about it, which is entirely valid too. But there are so many people who I was having these conversations with privately saying, yeah, I've had a similar experience, I'm from a similar background. And that wasn't really reflected in what was out there. So lots of people like to talk about religious trauma, Christian trauma, those kind of things, but in a very sort of superficial way, and sometimes a little bit dismissively. Someone might make a statement online, and you know how it is online, everything is dissected or brushed away or whatever. It's a strange little corner of the world. But someone might say something and they get a comment going, oh, that's just your religious trauma, or you need to unpack your Christian baggage. And it, to me, that seemed very dismissive, and also a very strange way to talk about what can be quite a profound trauma. And I wanted to bring something into the conversation that goes, no, this is a journey that a lot of people have had, whether they come from controlling religion or just another religion in general, because a lot of the sort of beats of that story and journey are quite similar. And okay, people are telling you, deal with your Christian baggage, deal with your religious trauma, but what does that actually mean, and how do you do it? Because someone saying that to you isn't going to fix anything. And so I thought, if I sit with my journey and my story and see what have I learned from that, what can I bring to this conversation, and what do I wish I could say to myself as I was taking those first steps, and how can I do that in a gentle way? Because the reality is, when you leave something that is very controlling, or you leave a religion in general, your entire world crumbles, because spirituality is such a foundational part of who we are, that when you leave that entire system behind, whether it's controlling or not, that's a huge part of yourself that goes with it. And you need to find some kind of way to fill that gap. And that is a huge task. And it's no wonder a lot of trauma can come with that. And so that sort of was my first step motivation. But then I also wanted it to be a celebration of everything we have as pagans of any variety, of that freedom, of taking that joy in interpretation and symbolism. Ultimately, I believe this path we walk is one of celebration and joy. And that should be marked. So
Yeah.
from the outset, I was very clear. I didn't want to, woe is me, this is the story, these are the terrible things that happened to me. That's relevant to the story only in as much as it informs where I've come from. But what really matters is where I am now and how joyous and celebratory that is. And so it was that, this is way too long an answer, but that mix of
No, it's perfect.
addressing something I don't think was being very well addressed, while also taking the time to go, this is really cool, we have something amazing, and telling people why I think that is and why it's worth it. Why is it worth leaving something that is so core to who you are and taking this difficult journey? Why is it worth it? What do you get at the end? And ultimately, to me, it boils down to that joy and that freedom that comes with walking a spiritual path that's truly resonantly satisfying.
Yes, that was a perfect answer. I loved that. Oh, yes, this is, oh my gosh. Okay. I thought of a couple things. Here in the US, we have a lot of Mormons, and I think they're everywhere, but in the US we got Mormons. And it's interesting because what you said, there are people specifically who help, especially the Mormon groups that are more what they call fundamental. When people try to leave those, they have house. There's one guy who's doing a fantastic job. I think he takes in mostly people who identify as male, but they have nobody. A lot of them have nobody to talk to and nobody to go to because they've left this environment. And same you're saying, you leave behind your whole community. And there's also a documentary I watched years ago. It's called One of Us, about a Hasidic Jewish community where this woman, she leaves. She had an abusive husband. She had quite a few kids. I think she had 7 children. And the whole community ended up being against her. And she just says one thing in the documentary. She's like, the worst part about this is not like she was being abused. She's like, and obviously that was terrible. But she's like, literally every time I was sick, somebody would come give me food or help me with my kids. Every time I needed someone to talk to, I had someone to talk to. She's like, I've lost all of that because I left my community, even though, of course, she was being abused. But I think that is the part of it people forget about. Like, I'm always interested in reading these stories about high control groups because they're interesting. But at the same time, the people who leave, the reason that sometimes people have issues is if they cannot find support, they are left to be by themselves. And that is super, super hard. And you're also left to deal with living in an environment that for some people, not everybody, but for some people may be very unfamiliar to them, depending on how high control the environment was. If you have to go and be in a community where you're like, wow, let's take like Amish people. Everybody out here is using the computer. I don't know how to use the computer. That's a shock to your system. So depending on, that's just one example, but depending what's going on, it's interesting. And then the other thing that you said that I was so happy to hear you say, and you talking about celebrating the community, it's beautiful that you said that because I feel like we don't do that enough. There's a lot of like, I know this and this is the right way and this is what we should do. And it's like, can we all just enjoy the fact that we can enjoy it? Like can we all just have a good time? Yeah. And think about the fact, and yeah, and obviously it's not everywhere, but in different communities, and I think about this, it's hard. In the United States, I think is a whole other issue with Black Americans, but some are very against any type of African religion. But the people who are in African traditional religions, I'm like, I think you guys should all celebrate that our ancestors used to get murdered for doing that. Like, I think let's all just be like, yay, we're not going to get murdered. Like, this is great.
Yeah, it's so reclaiming though, isn't it? There's so much power in that. And there is so much to celebrate, I think. It's just wonderful. Yes. And that community side of it is so important, I think. I had a very similar experience to the one you were describing, where when I was raised, I wasn't allowed to have any kind of association with people outside of the religion. I couldn't join any sort of after-school activities, have any friends, couldn't go to university, couldn't pursue really well. I found work for people within the religion. So every part of my life, by design, was within it. No contact with people outside. And then when someone leaves or someone's cast out, there's a very strict shunning policy. So they have all community
Mm.
withdrawn. So it becomes this perfect emotional blackmail trap where you're doctrinally forced to invest all of your community with the group, and then that's what's used as the leverage to keep you there. Because we all want community. It is something we
Mm-hmm.
need as humans. It's
Yes.
something joyous and celebratory.
Yes.
And that's what these groups do. They prey on our needs. But that means when you leave, you still need
Mm-hmm.
community. And if you're never in one of these groups, you still need community. They just take it to the most extreme
Yes.
position to leverage it against you. So when I left, that was one of the big considerations and why it was so difficult is I lost everyone. I lost my job, I lost
Yeah.
my family even. Thankfully they eventually left too, but for about a year they were
Mm-hmm.
shunning me. I've got a powerful memory of my little brother coming to my house after about 18 months after I left. I hadn't spoken to him for that entire period of
Mm-hmm.
time, and he came round and apologized and he wanted to leave too, and it was the first time I ever
Oh.
spoke to him. He broke down in tears, I broke down in tears, and it was such a beautiful thing. But
Mm-hmm.
what's so difficult about it is, like, for example, in that situation I understood exactly what he'd been going through and the pressure that was inflicted on him because I'd been there and I'd experienced it and I'd done the
Yeah.
same. That's the thing, like when you're within the group you subscribe to those shunning policies, and it's finding a way not to carry that guilt forward as well and move on in a healthy way into community, because that messes you up in all kinds of ways and it makes it so
Yeah.
difficult to interact healthily with community. So
Mm-hmm.
it can make you so insecure with your relationships and attachments when you've been through this cycle of losing literally everyone overnight in one go. So you can
Mm-hmm.
either become a bit avoidant and not want to invest, or you can start holding on too tight. And that's one of the difficult things I think that comes with leaving. But I think it can go the other way, where
Mm-hmm.
it teaches you truly the value of community, where sometimes
Yeah.
we don't appreciate things until we've lost them. So even though it was an incredibly unhealthy environment, it
Mm-hmm.
made me appreciate community more in a healthy way. So now, when I
Mm-hmm.
have this community in the world of paganism, it's something I'm so grateful for. It's something I appreciate. It's something I want to invest in because I know what it feels like to have that all taken away and all gone. And informs the way I try and interact with community now and create those safe spaces. And it's another reason
Mm-hmm.
why I wanted to write the book, just to acknowledge for other people it might be really bad what you're going through. You might lose everyone, but there's hope on the other side. Because that's one of the big lies
Yeah.
they use is, as I was told as a gay man, that outside of the religion everyone
Mm-hmm.
was unhappy and there wasn't a single happy gay couple on earth. That obviously not only is your association controlled, the kind of media you're allowed to watch is controlled. So anything with gay characters you can't watch. So you believe their lies.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone who lives a gay life is unhappy. That's what they tell you. And it's not until you start to see examples that disprove that you start to have hope for yourself. So it
Mm-hmm.
was looking to community and seeing happy gay couples living their best life that helped me see through that. And that was a
Mm-hmm.
powerful benefit of community that I personally experienced, because if I didn't have that hope, it would have been so much more difficult to leave. And so allowing myself to expose myself to other ideas of community as well was really important.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something I've tried to put into the book again as a celebration of joy and of freedom. Is it works out. It does. I'm happy. I'm a happy person on the other side of that experience. And my life and journey is living
Yeah.
proof of the lies they tell. And here's hope. Have hope. You can get through this. You can find a new community. You can integrate into it. And life can be so good outside of that controlling environment.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yes. Oh, yay. And that's another thing that you mentioned that I think is so wild too. You live in this environment with people telling you these lies, like you said, and a lot of the people telling you lies are people you care about. It's not just people who are just like, no, it might be your family. Like you said, if you and your brother are in this environment and you're raised to believe this, your brother, when you left, maybe he was like, yeah, it's bad. But then he came to his own realization for himself and was like, no, now I feel this way. So it's like, it's just because these people have done, and I think this isn't a lot of different types of trauma. Somebody you care about has done something to you and you're like, okay, I don't want to deal with this anymore. It doesn't mean you just instantly stop giving a crap about these people. It doesn't mean like, oh, I don't care about them anymore. But you realize maybe I have to take care of me. And if those people can't be part of my journey right now or ever, it's just a situation. And that, I can't imagine the amount of mental strength that it took for you to do that. I'm in awe because I haven't been in that situation, and I can't even imagine having to be like, okay, I have to prioritize my mental health and like who I am. And like you said, you being gay and you're like, gay people are all unhappy. You're like, wait a minute, are you sure? Because I might not be unhappy if I'm not in this environment. I'll be fine. And now you're fine. So having even the mental work, because a lot of people end up, unfortunately, like I know people like this who have ended up being like, I'm just going to live this life the way they tell me. And then they end up being, unfortunately, not everybody, and I don't mean to generalize at all, but some people end up living a life that they don't feel is right for them, and they just do it to make other people happy, and then they end up having a very destructive life because they don't feel like they matter because they were always told who they are is wrong or this is bad and you shouldn't do that, and then they end up not being happy. But to take yourself and be like, I'm gonna put myself through this difficulty to come out the other side and let's just see what happens. And then you wrote a whole book where you're showing people like, hey, yeah, it's really gonna probably suck for a minute, like in several minutes, maybe couple hours, days, weeks, we don't know, everybody's journey is different, but you can come out the other side. And also, if anything, you could be like, damn, I did that was wild. That was a wild thing that I just did. You're stronger than me, Moss. Damn.
Thank you. But I think anyone can find the strength. And I think it is such a challenging thing to go through, but you get to a point where you don't have that much of a choice if you want to live a happy life. I got to a point where the question that went through my head basically was, do I want to live miserably and die faithful, or do I want to live happily for I don't know how long? Because at the time I actually left, I still believed the doctrine they were teaching, which is a bit of an apocalyptic one where they're like, any day now, God's going to step in and destroy everyone. The fundamentalist teachings. So I got to a point where I was like, it's worth, say I've got 2 years left of this world. Do I want to be happy, or do I just want to trudge through life miserably for the sake of being faithful and hopefully things will work out? And I don't think that's sustainable. We're not made to live miserably. And it's, yeah. But it's so messed up when you're in that, because they tell you you're happy. They tell you you're the happy people. You've always got to be smiling. When people see you on the street, have a smile on your face. And there's this intense sort of idea that you should be happy. So you convince yourself, no matter how miserable you are, actually I'm happy, and I'll always make sure people see me with a smile. And it's a really interesting thing, because that's something I've spent a bit of time reading about since I've left, because that's the path that leads into spiritual bypassing in a lot of instances. And that's one of those really difficult aspects of religious trauma that people have to deal with when they leave, because you assign this moral weight to emotions. Like being sad, that doesn't have a moral weight. It's not a bad thing. Being angry doesn't have a moral weight. It's not a bad thing, generally speaking. And you get convinced that there are good and bad emotions, and you should get rid of the bad ones or pretend they're not there and just show the good ones. And when you leave, you have to get out of that mode of thinking. And I know it's something I struggled with for a while, but I think a lot of people get caught up in that and never get past it. And instead of getting to a point where you do the thing that paganism offers you so profoundly, which is getting knowledge of yourself and looking inward and finding that depth of self-discovery, instead you go, oh, I feel bad, that's bad, I should ignore that and put that away. Or you get into a place where, oh, not to offend anyone, but you start thinking in a very love and
Go
light
ahead.
way, and you start to think, oh,
Go
give
ahead.
everyone for everything all the time. I must live my life
Hmm.
only forgiving. I can't ever hold resentment or anger towards anyone because love and light or whatever. But then you never
Hmm.
confront those emotions in yourself. So, an example that I read in a paper recently from a therapist who was writing about his experiences dealing with religious trauma is he might sit with someone who starts talking about their relationship with their parents, and they'll start talking about something they really
Hmm.
struggle with their mother, and then they stop themselves, they cut themselves off, and they go, oh, but that doesn't matter because I've forgiven her. And it's so obvious they haven't, but they
Hmm.
can't accept
Yes.
those negative emotions in themselves, negative in air quotes. And so rather than going inward and finding that depth of self discovery and actually going through the path that allows you to learn about yourself and, in fact, actually get to the point of forgiveness, you bury it. So, in
Yeah.
refusing to confront anger and resentment, you make sure it always lives there. And to me,
Hmm.
it's that it's why I struggle with spiritual bypassing, but also why I can understand it on some level. Because when you're taught constantly, every emotion has a moral weight, and you can only have the good emotions and you need to repress the bad ones, you can bring that into witchcraft. And you can start to understand why
Hmm.
that love and light way of doing things becomes appealing, because that's almost exactly the way Christianity teaches you to deal with emotions. Get rid of the bad,
Yeah.
in air quotes, only think about the good and amplify the good. But that's not really witchcraft to me at all. Because again, that great strength
No.
is that we get greater self discovery. We get to go within, we get to sit in ritual and deal with the heaviest of emotions.
Hmm.
At Samhain, we might sit and deal with grief that leaves you at the end of
Hmm.
ritual in floods of tears. But that's not a bad thing. That doesn't have a moral weight. It just is, and it allows you to know yourself and to sit with those emotions. And it's a really difficult thing to talk about sometimes because you can understand why that path of avoid and repress might appeal to someone who's been through difficult things, but also it's something that's worth unlearning over time, and it's worth
Yes.
finding a way through to deeper self knowledge. But it's also a
Hmm.
journey. You're not going to wake up one morning and go, do you know what? I figured out that I can just experience all my emotions and it doesn't matter, because you've been told for decades that you shouldn't do that. And so it's that process of unlearning.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's really complicated because you can't just shout at someone and go, stop spiritual bypassing, stop doing that, get a grip, fix yourself. It's
Yeah.
so that it gets so complicated.
You're so right. I used to do, and I didn't even recognize it till maybe a few years ago. I used to do a ton of spiritual bypassing because I was just like, I'm fine. Why does everyone keep asking? Think I'm angry? I'm not angry. I'm fine. I've thanked everybody for everything because I love them and I'm grateful and it's fine. And then it's like when I really got into my spiritual path, I started to realize like I'm really pissed off like about a lot of few things that happened in my life. I'm really pissed off with a lot of people. And the whole time and it's a coping mechanism for me. I was like, if I get angry, I don't, how can I word this? I was so used to living with this like underlying anger that I didn't know who I'd be without it. So I was like, if I actually deal with my shit, I don't know what's gonna happen. Will I explode? Will I just like spontaneously erupt? I will be gone. I don't know. I was like, so I'm just gonna keep it inside on the low and just like, keep what I used to do all the time, martyring myself for people and
Mm,
just acting like, oh yeah, I'll do this. I'll be this person for you all the time. And then when I was love and lighting it so hard and to the point that I realized I'm deeply hurting myself because I'm
mm,
absolutely miserable doing. I feel like I'm being used and abused by people. I feel like I mean nothing because all I am is somebody to do things for other people. Like I did this deep dive and it was like 6 months of me just like crying about my life and it was okay. I
Mm.
came out though realizing like, I actually don't have to live like that. Like it's gonna be fine. And I think when I was younger and my situation is different than yours, but I was very much the person for a lot of people in my life, my own family. I was like, I had to be the strong one. So I felt, let me just always be fine. Because if I'm not fine, I think my family is going to fall apart. So
Mm.
I have to keep it together. But now I've learned I don't have to keep it together. I'm allowed to say, this is too much. I can't handle this. And there is nothing like going back to what you said, emotions don't have good or bad. Everybody is allowed to, as I always say to my fiance, you are allowed to be mad. It's about how you are mad. Because like
Yeah.
you can be upset with me. Yeah, it's no problem if I do something that annoys you. Fair, I'm can be annoying too. But it's just about how we feel those feelings. But feeling them is important, and it's part of our human experience. And for me and my spiritual path too, it brought me, and it's whatever people define, it's brought me closer to my gods and my God for me because I am feeling all these different things. And I think they want us to. That your divine inside you is, yeah, be a full person. You're only being half a person when you're like, no, I'm good. See, I'm fine because I'm here and I'm part of this thing. See, we're all so great. No, it's okay. And like you said, growing up for you, like and coming away from that, it's you were trained to be this way. Of course, it would be difficult for you to be like, wait, I can just be mad now. Everyone, this is okay. Looking around the room, everybody good. I'm just gonna be a little pissed off. It's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so difficult to do, isn't it? And what's
Mm-hmm.
really horrible, I think, about it is that so much of it's rooted in shame, that these really strict
Yeah.
high control environments, they thrive off shaming you. So when you show a little bit of anger, when you show that you're a little bit
Yes.
sad, you get shamed for it, and you learn to associate that shame with the emotion you're experiencing. But I don't think that's unique necessarily to the high control religion environments. I think a lot of people from minority backgrounds, they're used to the same kind of thing because it's rooted so much in patriarchy, in these ideas of white
Yeah.
supremacy, that if you show that you're actually angry at the system, if you show that actually things are messed up and they shouldn't be this way, that you're
Yeah.
shamed for that. And you start to associate that a
Yes.
little bit with the emotion then you're feeling, and it pushes in that direction of spiritual bypassing. And I think spiritual bypassing especially does minorities a great disservice because it helps to uphold that status quo. It helps it essentially it benefits those in power and in positions of privilege because it goes, if you're sad about this situation, if you're angry about the way you're being taken advantage of, that's bad and you should feel ashamed of that. But anger has its place, sadness has its place. They're
Yes.
important, and generally the most privileged benefit when they can make those without privilege silent. And spiritual bypassing is one way that can happen.
So true. Oh my god. Yes, that is yes. I'm very conscious of sounding angry. As a black woman in the United States, you're always labeled as being mad. Like even if I'm joking, it's people be like, "Ooh, she's mad." I'm not mad. I'm just talking. Like Jesus Christ, leave me
Mm.
alone. Yeah, if you're seen as aggressive, like just because you are like, if somebody does something to me that makes me angry, like I'm allowed to be mad. But I used to feel like I need to be like the model black person and like just be very
Mm.
calm and accepting of every situation. And I'm just not. So, so now maybe I'm a little
But
angry sometimes. Just everyone's got to deal with it. Sorry.
but that's a
Yeah.
really valid thing, and it's rooted again in those ideas of shaming people for the emotions they experience, for valid emotions. We're all humans. We all
Mm-hmm.
have this vast range of emotion that helps us connect spiritually in
Exactly.
all manner of ways. And it's so ick to me when emotions are shamed because
Mm-hmm.
it leads to those
Yeah.
awful outcomes and situations. And ultimately, it's designed to keep people quiet. And that's
Mm-hmm.
never a good thing.
It's not. You know what the real problem is? And me and my sister talk about this all the time. That all like the cishet white men are afraid that one day that the rest of us we're all gonna rise up and we're gonna beat them up. That's the problem. And I know you guys.
Yeah.
I know anyone who's listening to this. I know this is what you guys are afraid of. And maybe we will. We're gonna keep you on your toes.
Yeah.
We'll never know. Yeah, the rest of us minority groups, you don't know what we're gonna do. We're all secretly meeting, but we don't tell you about it. Just kidding, we're not. But we are. Anyway.
Yeah. Sorry, I've taken a big detour in spiritual bypassing that.
I know.
Something must be on my mind.
It's totally fine. No, it's totally fine. This is important. This is a great. Yes, this was wonderful. Hey guys, it's me, your host. So I hope you're enjoying this episode. I had such a good time talking to Moss. I just wanted to remind you that you're listening to Dine with the Divine. And if you could do me a huge favor, if you could go on whichever podcast app you listen to us on, most of you it's Apple or Spotify. I'd really appreciate if you gave me a little review. Tell me what you think of the podcast. We love a 5-star, but whatever you say it with your chest. So here we go. Enjoy the rest of the episode because we have a really fun story coming up. We're going to chit chat now about, real quick, we're going to talk about our dish of the week. So our dish of the week isn't really a dish. It's because we're going to talk about fairies in a minute because Moss always talks about fairies and it makes me laugh and giggle on Instagram and it makes me so happy. So we're going to talk about it real quick. If you want to give some fairies a little offering, what would you give? So that's like our dish of the week. Okay, everybody be cool with it. So you want to give them some food, you're going to give them some sweet stuff. They like sweet stuff, it seems like, but also sometimes mushrooms because mushrooms are really healthy for you. So you should eat them. I know I used to hate mushrooms, but I like them now. Give them some bread, some cakes, some honey, some wine, some milk. Yeah, I don't know if you want to leave a glass of milk out for too long, but see what you want to do with it. Berries, fresh fruit. Ooh, they also like trinkets, like some jewelry. Who doesn't love a little jewelry gift? They also like music. They said, I read something, they were like, oh, write a song. I'm like, that's so cute. If you're that talented, write a song for your fairies. I'm sure they'll appreciate it. Some herbs such as like thyme, mugwort, willow, elder. They also like flowers like roses, bluebells. They also like oak. Wait, what? Okay, ignore that. They also like cowslip, foxglove, lavender, mint, and clover. So those are some of the things you can offer fairies if you want to offer it to them. All right, next, we're going to talk a little bit about fairies in general. What the hell are fairies? Are you wondering? Maybe. Well, let's chit chat. A fairy, according to our favorite girl, Wikipedia, because we love a Wikipedia article. A fairy, also known as fae, F-A-Y, fae, F-A-E, fae, F-E-Y, fair folk, or fairy, F-A-E-R-I-E. English language is too much. They're a type of mythical being, right? So they're seen as being tiny, anthropomorphic, meaning they have like human emotions, and they're found in multiple folklores around Europe. So we have Celtic folklore, Slavic folklore, Germanic folklore, French folklore. They're usually a form of like spirit, and they have metaphysical or natural, supernatural, preternatural. I don't know what that word means. That's okay. I gotta look that up later. Qualities. There's tons of origins all over the world. We'll talk about those in a second, how they came to be. And fairies are like named for like a lot of different, usually smaller creatures that are like little creatures in different places. So you also have like subgroups. That's what I think of them. Like a goblin or a dwarf or a elf. Sometimes people will say they're kinds of fairies. Even leprechauns, people will call them kinds of fairies, but it's up to you. You decide what you want to think. Moss and I said, you do what you want with the mythology. It's fine. Reinvent it for yourself. So there are some theories about fairies and like where they came from. And I thought these were interesting. So actually, one really interesting thing, because I've been reading a lot about jinn lately. So jinn or genies. Some people think that actually jinn are like the North African, Arabic, Persian version of fairies, or vice versa, because they have a lot of similar qualities. Even though jinn, their stories are a bit slightly different, but they have the same thing. Like, okay, a lot of fairies stories, they have like communities, they have hierarchies. So they have kings and queens. There's a lot of fairy queens. You always hear stories about that. And they also like are not necessarily good or bad. Sometimes they're just there. There are sometimes like bad fairies who will be like, yes, I am the bad fairy or the good one. But most of the time they're just doing whatever they want. And sometimes they don't even want to deal with people. Like, to be honest. Like, one thing I'm going to say, like, sometimes they're like, one thing I will say, and it's the same thing with Jinn. Fairies, usually you hear stories about fairies. Like, where do they live? In trees, underground. They have their own community. Jinn are the same. Jinn live in parts of the desert where people don't even walk around because they don't want to deal with us. Humans, we are so annoying to them. They're like, actually, we can't stand them. They're always in our lives. They're always bothering us. But there are a few fairies and Jinn who want to come around. So there's a theory that fairies are like demoted angels in the fact that, so they believe that like when Lucifer left heaven and he's like, I'm going to take some of my boys with me. And he went down there, that God was like, fine, go. What they had like a bad breakup, just how I think of it sometimes. Lucifer's like, you don't let me be independent. And God was like, girl, I didn't do anything to you. And Lucifer's like, yes, you did. So Lucifer's like, I'm going to call my boys and we're about to leave. So they did. And then God's like, fine. And God like slams the door because he's mad. So when he slammed the door, and while Lucifer slammed his door because Lucifer was pissed off too, all his boys and him went down there to AKA hell or wherever you think they went. And then God in heaven slammed his door. And then in the middle were some of the angels. And they're like, wait a minute. And they went to go try both doors and the doors were locked because God and Lucifer were pissed off. And they were like, I guess we have to be fairies now. So that's one theory, is that they're angels that just got stuck. and, then, and then they just had to deal with us. And they're like, okay, I guess since mom and dad got in a fight, now we have to stay outside. So think of that what you want. Some say that story is also like angels weren't like evil enough to be like demons, but they weren't like super holy. And that also makes me laugh because the angels were probably super awesome. They just were like wanted to have fun sometimes. And there were like the super strict angels who were like, oh, we're just like God's soldiers. And they're like, yeah, but we also like to play tricks on humans because they're dumb. And God was like, yeah, but you can't do that. But they were like, but we're gonna because it's hilarious. So they ended up staying on Earth with us. Some people believe that they were demoted at one point, bigger pagan deities, and then they were just like worshipped as lower spirits because of Christianity came in and was like, stop worshiping trees. And also, why would you not worship trees? Trees are awesome and they've been there for thousands of years. So please worship a tree. It's great. Then there's also what it says here is an outdated theory, but I don't know what makes it outdated. But it says there's also a theory that fairy folk were a prehistoric race of people. It makes me think of not Lord of the Rings. What's the other show? My brain's actually melting on the weekend. You know the show on HBO, and it's a book. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. Don't worry about it. I'll think about it later. Anyway, the House of Dragon is another show. What show am I thinking of? Oh my god!
Sorry, it took me a while to. I was never allowed to watch it.
Oh my god, thank you. Oh, I was about to die. I was like, I cannot remember the name of the show. Yes, thank you, Moss. Game of Thrones. Yeah, so they think it's like a very Games of Thronesy situation here. Remember, what were they called? Like the Children of the Forest. There's this one race in Games of Thrones who invented the Night King and all the zombies. That's what they think the fairies were, basically. There's this one theory where they're like, they were this prehistoric race, and then humans came and they just got tiny and went into holes and ran away from them. Okay, that's another theory. Yeah, so those are some of the fairy theories. I didn't want to get crazy about the fairy thing, but I just thought it was interesting to read that, where they think they came from. And there's fairies everywhere. And honestly, in almost every culture, at least in Europe and Asia and in Africa too, we have some kind of small, tricky race of people living in weird places. I've always think, I think that mythology, it's got to be true, right? Because like, like, how did we all collectively think the same thing? You know what I mean? Like, how did somebody in Wales be like, I think there's tiny people under the ground. And then somebody in Kazakhstan was like, I think there's tiny people under the ground. And this was in the year like 2000 BC. How'd we all think the same thing? There was no Facebook. Couldn't call each other. So I think.
It is fun, isn't it? It's fascinating. I love it. There's a really fun theory I enjoy that there's an ancestor culture, because I'm obsessed with the Welsh and the German side of it, with that being my two nationalities. A lot of it ends up coming back to an academic theory that most European cultures originate in a Proto-Indo-European culture, so that there was a group of people in the region that's probably in the region that's now India that migrated across Europe, and that a lot of the folklore we have in Europe stems from their beliefs and the way that their culture and language informed a lot. So a lot of that's to do with etymology, and it goes way over my head. To be honest, I'm no expert on it, but that a lot of the European languages share a lot of commonalities, and from that we can certain Proto-Indo-European words and word groups. So a lot of comparative mythology looks at trying to find what that ancestor culture might have thought and how that sort of evolved into those beliefs. But again, that's very Europe centric and very theoretical. And the fact, but to me, if that is true, that's really interesting as well, because it means we've held on to those stories and beliefs for thousands of years. And why would we do that unless they mattered? Because we don't speak the same language anymore, but we might very well tell the same stories, which I find fascinating, that they were more important to us.
I find that fascinating too. And I wonder, okay, I understand why on like a surface level, but I wonder sometimes why, even during times when whole countries were being converted and a lot of these places had oral histories, why did they even think it was important to keep that? You know what I mean? I understand why it's important to keep, and you understand because we just love this shit. So we're like, yeah, keep it. Yeah, this is awesome. Yeah, like, but to them, it must have been like, it's interesting that these big religions came through and they tried to push out these indigenous religions and mythologies and beliefs like they weren't important, but they are important to all of our cultural identities. That there were people who were like, come hell or high water, I have to keep the story at least in my mind, and I have to tell other people so that we don't forget where we come from. And it's interesting that our ancestors still had that strength in them to be like, we can't let this wipe out. So you're saying it must be important then, because if it wasn't important, why would we remember it? It's not just the history, you know what I mean? This is not something that you can say this actually happened, but it must be important because everybody seems to need to know. So it's very interesting, that part of it too. And it's some brilliant. Of the stories too, what also I find, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, not at all. I just think it's absolutely brilliant, especially when you start comparing how similar a lot of the beliefs can be and how similar a lot of that lore can be and the kind of lessons it tries to teach. There's so much in it, isn't there?
Yes, it's so cool. And we're going to tell a story in a minute, but a lot of the stories, sometimes they don't. Okay. All right. I'm getting too excited. Okay. a lot of mythology, we were saying before, is like really wild. Like it doesn't actually make sense. Nobody, is licking a piece of ice and then a man comes out of the ice and is a giant. That doesn't actually make physical scientific sense. But this is a story that in Norse mythology has been told again and again. So it must be important for somebody for some reason. So that's why it's so interesting, because it's important, the identity of people and the community, that we keep telling people that there was a cow and the cow licked the ice and the man came out the ice and then the man drank the milk from the cow and then out of his leg he sweat and 3 people came. That's a weird story, but like it matters. And that's why we love mythology, because it's wild, but it's fun to try to figure out what it means. What does this mean for these people? What were these people living like? That's another thing you said and I forgot to talk about it. because I love that you said this. Listening to the stories about the people who lived at these times, we're never going to know how they lived. But it's so interesting that these are the stories that they told, and I'm trying to figure out, like, what did they mean when they were talking about this shit? Because then you have to go and look at the times they were living in. What were they going through? What kind of place? Even sometimes in mythology, you have to look at the foods they even eat, because sometimes a story about the food is important because the food that they were eating was very important to them at the time. Where my family's from in West Africa, if there's a story about yams and somebody steals yams, that's a big fucking deal because yams are a huge part of our diet. So if you get your yams stolen, blood might have to be shed. Shit's about to go down. So, like, it's those kinds of things that you pay attention to, and it makes the story so much more interesting. You're like, oh, right, that's my rant about mythology. Just, oh God. See? Moss, you are my people. This is why I love this stuff so much. It's amazing. Okay. So we're going to tell a story. Again, I told you this is going to be a really random fairy story. Maybe we can theorize what the point of this story was, but I literally have no idea, but that's what made it funny to me. Because I was like, what is this story about? Okay. So this is a story from our friend Hans Christian Andersen, the Swedish fairy tale dude. You all know Little Mermaid. He wrote that one. He has a whole book. It's very cute. So let's start the story. So the story starts with these lizards, and they were gossiping. So they were gossiping and talking about, they live near this place called Elfin Hill. And lizard number one was like, I haven't been able to sleep for days because Elfin Hill has been popping. There's noise, there's chatter, people are banging pots around. I don't know what's going on over there. So lizard two was like, yeah, I heard that noise too. That was crazy. And then lizard three is me. Lizard three is like, oh, girl, I have a friend. I'm going to go find out what happened. So lizard three is the nosiest one of them all and goes to their friend Earthworm. And Earthworm, I don't know why this is important to the story. Again, it's a fairy tale. Earthworm is blind, but he's not deaf. And he's nosy, again, like me, and listened to what was going on. And the Earthworm told the lizard that, oh, there's about to be some high-ranking guests coming to Elfin Hill. So the visitors in the hill, they're getting ready. So the fairies in there, they're getting ready for stuff to have this big party. So they got all the will-o'-the-wisps. I don't know what will-o'-the-wisps are. I think they're like another type of fairy or something. So they were ordered to hold a torch dance. So they're going to dance. And there's silver and gold being brought into Elfin Hill. And it's being polished. And they are putting out moonshine on the floor. So it looks really nice. So Earthworm is a nosy girl. And Earthworm told her the whole story. So Earthworm told the lizard. Then, at this moment when Earthworm's telling the tea, the Elfin Hill opens up and out comes this fairy lady, and she's actually one of the maids at Elfin Hill. So she walks up to Raven, who's probably been standing there the whole time listening to this story, acting like they don't know what's going on, but I think Raven did. So Elfin Hill, the housekeeper, she comes and she's like, hey, listen, Raven, we're having a big party tonight and I have some invitations and I need you to hand them out. And Raven's like, who's coming to the party? Am I invited? So you just want me to do your dirty work for you? And she's like, shut up, Raven. Let me explain. She's like, everybody's coming to the ball. Even maybe some humans, if they can act right. But you know how humans are. They're a hot-ass mess. But at the banquet part, we're only having the VIPs. We're having some trolls. We're having some gnomes. We're even inviting one of the mermen and his girl, a mermaid. But we have to figure out the logistics because they have to be in water the whole time and they're not really into the whole land thing. So like we're even inviting wood demons, a grave pig, a death horse, and all the forest animals. Go get out these invites, please. Hurry up. It's tonight. Fine. Few hours later, just like on SpongeBob. Few hours later, now all the elven girls are all dressed up. They look cute as hell, and they're dancing. They have these long shawls. They have a mist machine, maybe, I don't know. They have mist, and there's moonshine, and everybody looks super, super good. So they're dancing on the floor. Let me explain. I'll also read the description of what it looked like. In the middle of the Elfin Hill was the Great Hall, splendidly decorated. The floor had been washed with moonshine, and the walls rubbed with the witch's fat. I don't know where that came from. Hopefully not a dead witch. That's terrible. Maybe it's just a metaphor. Ooh. We don't know. Hopefully not killing witches in Elfin Hill. So that They shone in the light like tulips. In the kitchen, plenty of frogs were roasting on the spit. Ugh. Snail skins with the children's finger. Oh no, they're eating children. I didn't read this whole part. Sorry, everybody. Trigger warning, they might be eating children's fingers. Sorry. Snail skins with little children's fingers and a salad of mushroom spawn. Wet mice's snouts. Ew. And hemlock. Hemlock's very toxic. Don't eat that. Moss, you're funny. I like your faces. Beer brewed with your eyes, you're like, ooh, that's not safe or healthy. Beer brewed by the marsh witch. Okay, so they killed some witch to use their fat, but they made the marsh witch make them beer. Okay, I don't know how I feel about that. Sparkling saltpetre wine from grave cellars. Some rusty nails and church window glass were among the sweets. All right, I should have read that before I put it in here. I just like copy and pasted some of the story. Did not read what they were going to eat, and that is a wild meal. Anyway, let's move on from that. So the Elfin King, he looks super good. His gold crown is polished. Cool. And in the bedroom, the curtains were hung up and they were fastened with snail slime. Ew. Anyway, it was a party. That's all you have to know. It was an elven party. Now, one of the girls, they were dancing, and one of the girls stopped dancing, and she's like, Papa, what's the point of this actual ball? Like, what are we doing here? And the king is like, okay, let me tell you what's going on. Actually, out of all my daughters, I think he's got 7 daughters. He's like, 2 of y'all are getting married. I don't know who yet, but 2 of y'all are leaving tonight and you're getting married. And they were like, what? He's like, yes, sorry. I didn't tell you about your non-consensual marriage yet. But I invited a king from a patriarchy sucks. I invited this Norwegian goblin to come in and his 2 sons who don't have any home training. But the guy was like, listen, the last time I saw these sons, they were running amok, up and down. They were young. Maybe they're better now. Don't worry. So the girls are like, oh, God, this is terrible. Why do we live in a time where our dad gets to tell us what to do? But who knows? So anyway, now the Goblin King from Norway shows up. Everyone's so excited. They're like, oh, the dude's here. And he comes in with his 2 sons. Now, the Goblin King is super cool. He's really nice. He's bowing to all the daughters and the king. And he's like, hey, guys, thank you so much for having me. Meanwhile, his 2 sons, like I said, have no home training. They come in. They're pushing each other. They're acting a mess. He's telling them, bow down, you guys. Jesus Christ. Finally, they bow down. Then they go to sit at the table. They put their feet on the table. And their dad was like, get your feet off the table. That's nasty. So they get their feet off the table. And you know what they do next? They take their shoes off, give them to the daughters to hold, and put their feet back on the table. The girls are not impressed. Nobody is. Everyone's like, these people they have no manners. So now the Goblin King is a little embarrassed, but he tries to like smooth it over. He starts just chit-chatting with everybody and being really sweet. So then this is also the description of the Goblin King, what his cool crown looks like. He had a crown of hardened icicles and polished fir cones. That's cool. And he also wore a bear skin. Not if you don't like to kill bears. Sorry about that. He wore a bear skin and great warm boots. And his sons, though, on the contrary, were bare-necked with no cool stuff on because they said they were strong and they didn't need it. Whatever. They sound like they suck. Anyway. So the Goblin King is cool, and he starts telling them stories about Norway and what it's like and how they love to ride in the snow and listen to jingle bells. And everybody's really enchanted with the Goblin King and his stories, and they love listening to him talk. And the boys are just like, we're going to go outside and, I don't know, play with a pine cone. And they're like, okay, fine, go away. Nobody likes you guys either. Anyway, so they leave. And the Elfin King is like, okay, I got a surprise for our guest. All my daughters are going to show their talents. Okay, cool. So the first one, I don't understand how this is a talent, but the first one took some wood shavings and put them in their mouth and she swallowed them. And that was her talent. The king was like, that's really weird. Okay, that's not really a talent. And this girl's going to marry one of my sons because that's a weird talent. And then the Elven King was like, okay, sorry, let's try another one. So another one of his daughter was like, look, I have a shadow and it walks next to me. And the king was like, once again, that's weird. It's not really a talent. It's what shadows do. I don't know why you're showing me this. I told you guys this is a weird story. So then the third daughter, she learned how to make beer from the marsh witch, remember our friend before, and she also knew how to make lard out of elder tree logs with glowworms. And the king was like, okay, I guess she would make a good housewife. That's fine. I guess it's another weird talent, but it's actually useful. She can make lard, and we need that because it's old-timey times, and we always need lard, apparently, for fires and stuff. Then the fourth girl, she had a real talent. She could play the harp. That's a real talent, finally. Actually, no, let me not shit on the other girl who could cook lard, because you do need lard sometimes, I think. Sorry, I didn't mean to make fun of her, but this is a different talent. So this girl had a golden harp, and she actually was able to play it with her feet. Even more talent. This is a real talent. She could play with her feet. But then for some reason, the Goblin King was like, this is a dangerous woman. I don't know why that made her dangerous, but he thought it wasn't good. So then the fifth daughter now, her talent was that she spoke Norwegian and she wanted to go to Norway. That's not really a talent, wanting to go to Norway. I want to go to Norway, but that's not a talent. Anyway. And she said she will not marry anybody unless they're Norwegian. But then the younger sister told the Goblin King, oh, that's only because she heard a story that in Norway, that the cliffs, they are really tall and she's afraid of sinking. Okay. So the king was like, okay. This is the weirdest story. So then, okay, the last two daughters, I think the last two daughters, they danced. Both of them, they were really good dancers, and they just danced. The Goblin King was like, ooh, they're really good. But what else can they do other than dance? I think they need to do more. So then he's like, okay. So he called out the last daughter. Let me show you. And she was very cute. She's like the cutest one, apparently. The last daughter was like, I'm a good storyteller. And he's like, are you a good storyteller? She's like, I sure am. How many stories you want to hear? He's like, I got 5 fingers. I want to tell me a story for every finger. And she's like, no problem. She took his hand and he touched, every time she told a new story, she touched one of his fingers until the end. And then the Goblin King grabbed her hand and was like, now you got to be my wife. And she's like, what? I thought it was marrying one of your sons. And he's like, nuh-uh. Your stories were so good. And the winters are long in Norway. I need somebody to talk to. So you got to marry me now. And she's like, okay, fine. So now she's going to marry him. Now, meanwhile, those 2 boys who were outside playing whatever they were doing outside, they came back in and they were like, so what's going on, Papa? Who are we marrying? And he's like, I don't know who you guys are going to marry, but I'm going to marry this girl because she can tell stories. And everybody had a good time, and they didn't even marry anybody, and the other girls didn't marry anybody. The old goblin danced with his new bride. They had the wedding ceremony then and there. That was fast. Then they said the cock was crowing, so the party had to be over. It's like 5 a.m. at this point, probably. So they said, shut all the doors because the sun is going to burn us up. It's too hot outside. And then literally the last sentence of the story was, the last couple sentences were, but outside the lizards ran up and down in the cleft tree, and one said to another, oh, how much I liked that old Norwegian goblin. I liked the boys better, said the earthworm, but he couldn't see, the miserable creature. I don't know why the story ended like that, everybody, but that's how the story ended. They wanted to remind you that the earthworm was still blind. I don't know why that mattered. It's the most insignificant detail of this story. Oh, God. So, that's the story of the Elfin Hill. I hope everybody enjoyed that. Moss, I hope you enjoyed it.
It's a good story with a lot going on. That teaches you If you don't want to have to marry a weird goblin boy, just be good at telling stories. Oh, I
Oh
could have done with
God,
that
that's
when I started
literally.
dating.
Yes, that'll be the moral of the story. You know what? Let's relate this to some other mythology, right? Let's talk about the fact that okay, you get to okay. Also, if stories, you get to marry the king and not some weird prince. You get to marry a king. Hopefully, he's not too gross. Hopefully, he's not too much older. But we don't know the details in its fairy time. Who knows? But also, you think about how stories are saving people, right? We think about like in 1,001 Nights, the whole point of all those stories, the whole point of 1,001 Nights was Scheherazade, the lady who was telling the stories, was saying all the stories that so the king didn't murder her. Man, you better, if you have one thing in your life of being good at, you better be good at telling a story. You'll save your whole life. Like, your life will be saved. You don't have to marry boys who have no home training. You're going to be fine. Just learn like a couple good stories. You'll save yourself from all sorts of situations. Oh God. Okay. So that's our weird goblin story slash fairy story slash a blind earthworm who was very nosy. Moss, that brings us to the end of the show, but this has been an absolute delight. I've enjoyed so much talking to you. This has been great. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been great fun. I've really enjoyed myself and the story was fantastic.
I'm glad. I was like, this story is weird as hell, and this poor guy's gonna have to sit here and listen to me tell it.
The weirder the better, honestly.
Oh gosh. Oh, but can you tell everybody where they can find you on the internet if they want to follow you and make sure that they hear any updates and get your book?
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully by now I'm Moss, and you can find me online literally pretty much anywhere under Moss Mattai, except for Instagram, where for some reason I'm Magic of the Moss. But I'm all over the place. Feel free to come say hi. My book, An Apostate's Guide to Witchcraft, is out in the fall, I believe the 4th of September in the US. So all the pre-orders for that are open if at all you're interested. And if you do end up getting my book, let me know what you think, good or bad. I'm very interested, even the bad news I'd like to hear. So leave me reviews wherever you feel like, if you do end up picking one of them up. And that's me.
Yeah.
Oh, did I mention I'm socially awkward?
You are socially wonderful, in my opinion. Yeah, I think you're wonderful. You are our new friend of the show, which is always fun. We love new friends here. This has been, yes, thank you so much. And everybody, all those links will be in the show notes. The link to pre-order the book if you want to, the link to his website, and all his socials will all be in there. It's no problem. So that brings us to the end of the show. And once again, I thank you so much, Moss, for hanging out with me for this time. And yeah, everybody, if you didn't know now, this is Dine with the Divine. You can find me wherever, where it's like YouTube and Threads and Instagram. Sometimes I don't post, and it's just because I'm tired. I have to try to post more, but I'm there. And if you need anything, you can email me at dinewiththedivine@gmail.com, dinewiththedivinepod@gmail.com. You can find me anywhere and message me. Anything you need to talk to me about, I'm here. Don't worry. And if you want to follow me, Ashley Sankofah HS, that's SANKOFAHS @gmail. That's my email address. Sankofah. Oh gosh, I forgot who I am. I'm at Sankofah HS, that's SANKOFAHS on Instagram, Threads, TikTok even sometimes. It depends on the day. But come by, say hi, and I thank you all for listening, and I'll see you all next week. Goodbye.